All right. So let's talk about what we're talking about today and stuff as far as um, creating links to allow us to share information back and forth across different pages and things like that. So inside of HTML pages, we obviously have the ability to create links, and links are going to allow us to go from one page to another. Um, or even sometimes within a page, we can jump down to a section. That's a real important thing to be able to do as well. So being able to interconnect those is an important piece of information. The concept and the idea of links actually dates back to the believe it or not, I think it was like the 40s, before obviously the internet, before there were computers, especially as we know them now. But the idea of being able to link microfiche from one document to another, and how they proposed being able to do that, was more like a lookup call number, kind of footnote type of idea instead of actually a link. Um, so this idea of being able to reference similar related documents has always been a real important thing. Doing it for a web page, because it's electronic, because it's all interconnected through the internet, it just became a lot simpler, a lot easier. It was one of the core things that made the internet back when it was still DARPANet really powerful, was the ability to link related research documents and stuff. Now we do it for all different types of things. Um, so what we're going to use is what's known as the anchor tag, and it's just an A, because remember, the original developers of the web did not like to, write any more than they absolutely had to. Um, and what we're going to reference is attribute. We're going to use attributes in order to specify how we're going to do those links. Um, so the anchor tag has some, they're actually optional uh, attributes depending upon how the anchor tag is used. So most typically we're going to use something called the href, or a hyperlink reference attribute. And that's going to specify the file that we want to go and reference. It's going to use a URI or URL in order to tell us what file that is going to be. It could be a relative link, something that's close to me, that's maybe in the same folder. It could be an absolute link. It's going to be an external link. It could be something a different website. So how we're going to do that is all up to it. The anchor tag has an open and closing tag. Inside of that is what's known as the link text. And that's what you see, and that's what you actually click on. So you don't see the URL most of the time when you have a link. You see some text, and it might say click here, or it might have a navigation name, or it might have something else. And that hidden attribute that you don't see, that's what takes us to our new location. Um, Click here is something that is, if you want to use that as your link text, that is something that people have a love-hate relationship with. It's very obvious what you're supposed to do, click here, but what does it talk about as far as what am I going to, you know? And whenever I'm building a website, one of the things I need to be very careful of is I want people to know what to expect. I don't want to surprise them. So I want to be able to say, if you click here, this is going to happen. I want you to know this. So while click here is very obvious, um, it also is very not obvious if all it says is click here. You have to have some surrounding context. So think about what you're putting in. I have a general form link here shown on the screen. Um, Ahref, and it goes to a link file. It says click here to link. And so they know we're going to go to a link. And that's seems like it gives them more information, but what link am I taking them to? What document are they expecting? Is this an HTML file? Is this a PDF? There's no real knowledge about that, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge. So we have to work with that. One of the websites I created years ago, um, we spent a lot of time. Anytime that there was an external link, we put a little icon beside it so we knew that they were leaving the website. if they're going to download a PowerPoint file or a PDF or a Word doc or any of those type files, we put a special icon besides the link. That way people knew what to expect. This was it was real popular to put viruses inside of Word documents and stuff like that. And so we were having to give people extra notice because surprising them with something like that was a bad thing. They did not like that. And so we wanted to give them as much information as possible. In order to do things like give them extra information, you can use also a title attribute, which I'm showing here kind of down below. It's another optional attribute. And if I put my mouse cursor over a link and there's a title associated with it, a little pop-up box will just show. And so I can put some additional information in there. So I might have, click here for resume, and then in my title I have, download a PDF document that lets me know, that lets you, view my resume. So, just kind of gives people some additional information, or I might specify what web page they're going to, click here, and it might have, 501 facts about, whatever, and, kind of fill in the blank there. There are some other attributes. There's actually several attributes that you can use when you're dealing with uh, an anchor tag. One of the other common ones that you're going to see is the rel, R-E-L. It's short for relationship. And it says, how does this uh, link relate to this current web page? And that's what it's designed for. So if I want to have a page to the author of the page, link to that, um, I can have that link and I can specify in rel author. Uh, and so that becomes more important in things like if I'm dealing with a news site or something like that, where I have a lot of potentially different authors. I want to know more about this particular author. Maybe get a list of other articles that they've written, maybe, give a bio and background information, etc. Um, external is a common value that says I'm going to another site as external to my current site. Um, Nofollow is actually one of the very first ones that was an attribute for the rel tag, or excuse me, rel attribute. Nofollow said, I'm going to provide a link because I want people to know about it, but I'm not, and Google came out with this, and the idea was I'm not endorsing this link. So maybe I'm showing, what not to do. So I don't want to, from a search engine perspective, I don't want to give any of my link juice to this, but I want you to see it as a reference option. The other two that I showed, just common examples, are next and prev, short for previous, of course. Uh, Once again, if I'm dealing with like a news type site, or I'm dealing with like a blog where I'm going to have articles that are constantly, about a certain topic and stuff, I can use next and previous. Um, and this is really designed more to help the search engine components. That way they understand, is this the next article in a series? Is this a previous article on a category? Is this, just, something else that's going on? Um, so those are pretty common things that you might see. Um, if you had a link, I was trying to see if I had an example here. I don't see one real quick. Um, I do here for the author. You can see. Um, and it does not put it in. Oh, yeah, here you go. So here is the anchor tag. Notice it has an optional class to style it slightly different than the way you normally see things. And the rel attribute specifies it as the author. So this is a perfect example of something like this, where we're using that relationship attribute. Uh, Not required by any stretch of imagination, but it is used out there and has a purpose. So, and this is this is something that was not, that was let me back up. This was something that is used early on in the internet, and it kind of faded out of favor, and now is back. and that's the internal page link. Um, Back in the 90s, it was kind of funny. Computer people and server people and stuff, they're weird because they didn't understand computers and the internet really, and what a file or files are. They tend to make really large single pages. Um, and the reason why was old server companies, they would sometimes charge you by the number of pages you had. So if you had a 5-page website, they'd charge you $10 a month to host it. If you had a 10-page website, they would charge you $15 a month to host it. And you had a 20-page website, $35 a month. And it would just go up and up and up. Um, and the idea was, well, the more pages you have, the more server resource you're going to use. And so people aren't stupid. What they did is they said, oh, well, I'll just make a really long page. I only have 3 pages, but each one is the equivalent of a small book. Um, and so server companies got smart. They said, well, we don't care how many pages you have. We're going to charge you by uh, the kilobyte or the megabyte, how much storage space you use. And then people said, okay, well, let's break these things up into smaller, more logical groups. Um, but when I had one long page or 2 or 3 long pages, I would sometimes need to jump inside. And so there's an internal way to have a link that lets me jump to a place inside my existing page. Um, it's done pretty well and it's pretty easy. The way I do it is I have an anchor tag, and instead of having an href attribute, I would have a name attribute. And you see an example here of where I'm doing that. And then my href for another anchor tag would be something like a hash symbol and then that name. Okay. So if I want to jump to the top of the page, I want to jump, chapter 1, chapter 2, or some other thing, I could easily do that. That was the old way. The new way is we can do the same thing with an ID. So I can specify any tag with an ID, and I can jump there, and it's going to scroll inside the page. And this has actually started to come back in style because I have some ways of doing this, especially on mobile sites or sites that are designed for mobile users. Because downloading a new page that takes time and it takes effort, and people are like, "Oh my goodness, now what?" So we're starting to see what they sometimes refer to as a single page website. Um, I might always have a menu, but if I click on a link, it's going to scroll me down further into the page somewhere. That way, I don't have to reload the whole page or a whole new page. I don't have to download a whole lot of new resources, which are potentially slow, especially on a mobile device. It just takes me right there. And nowadays, instead of jumping there, a lot of times with a little bit of JavaScript, we'll scroll there and get there a little bit slower, but we're still going to get there and we're going to see what we want. So we are seeing a resurgence of this. Like I said, because of the mobile devices, there's several single page frameworks that are out there. Um, they use special CSS and JavaScript, like I said, to control how it looks. And so if you see a href with a hash symbol or a pound symbol, how you refer to it, and then a name, is probably going to a ID element somewhere, or maybe a named, what they call a named anchor tag, um, so that it can be there. The downside to this is that a lot of times your web page is your whole website, because it's one web page, is also going to be kind of small. You can only have 3, 4, 5 sections before this starts to break down. So um, some new things, were really small. That's becoming kind of popular, but it has a very limited scope as to where it's useful. Um, if you think it is, it's great and you can use it, but a lot of times it's not as useful as a lot of people think it is. More commonly, what you're going to find is going to be a link inside of a web page, and that's what the site-wide links is all about. So we're going to see an anchor tag. We're going to see, okay, I want to do about us, or I want to see a home or something like that. I might have it inside of a web page and it links me to another page. But I'm always going to have this up in my navigation section. You can see that on top of the website here where I have a series of navigation. So what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of merge this in another section in. This becomes real popular with how we do things. If I bring up my notepad, I've got a sample here. This probably looks a little familiar. It's just a simple little page about some information. I've got a header with some text as far as that goes, but I then want to put in some sort of like H1 tag or maybe a paragraph for the title, so I can have a separate tag for my navigation. And let me show you what something like that looks like real quick. So I'm going to have a nav section. We talked about the nav section before. This is going to be something that's going to be repeated over and over throughout a bunch of different pages that relates to information about this article, this website. So this is not going to be something where it's unique to this one page. This is going to be all over. And this is going to tell search engines and other types of bots that, hey, this is information about navigating throughout my website. I'm not going to put every link here, and I'm probably not going to put links to external sites. This is just about our website. So if I have a navigation, usually my first option is going to be for home. So I do href equals, and then a lot of times I'll just use like a / and that takes me back to my home section. My root website. If you remember back when we talked earlier on about a web server, one of the things it had was a default web page. And so if I don't specify a web page, I'm going to use my default web page. And that's a perfect example of that. So then I have my link text and my closing anchor tag. I'll do another one. It's just going to be an href, and I'm going to say this is about us. And I might have another one too, but I don't know what the name of that file is going to be. So a little trick that if I want to make sure that I have a link and I see it as a link, not just as plain boring text, I will put a hash symbol. And that lets the browser know, hey, oh, it's an internal link. But I don't give it a name, so it doesn't have anywhere to go, but it still knows it's a link, so it's going to show as a link. And that's the important thing. Coming soon. And I just want to make sure I update this and fix this before I move forward. Okay. Let me go and I'm going to wrap this in a paragraph real quick. There we go. And I'm going to also wrap my name so we have that a site link to my name for the author section, just so we can see how we're going to do that. Okay. So if I take a look at this, and I'm going to view this file. Okay. I've got all my CSS, it's working. I got my background colors, I got my text size, I've got links here, I've got a link here, but there's a couple things that you might notice that are a little bit disconcerting, for lack of a better term. Okay. My link text is a little hard to read, and my difference here and here, not only is it hard to read, but it's a little hard to see. So we want to increase or improve our readability and usability by using combined selectors inside of CSS. So I'm going to come over here inside my style tag, and if I'm a link inside of a header, I'm going to say header A. So I'm an anchor tag inside of a header. Well, I want to have a color of white. If I reload that, it works. I can see that. My biggest issue is this gets a little bit lost. There's the text is small, is a little bit hard to use because it's all crammed up together. So we want to look at some of the things that we've done before to make this easier and better to use. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to say I want to modify those navigation headers or those navigation links inside my header, but I don't want to affect this information, this link here. It's also in a header, but it's not my navigation. So I'm going to specify nav anchor tag. New font family. I'm just going to choose sans serif. Just use the default sans serif for our browser. Font size. We're going to make it bigger so it's easier to see and click on. And then we are going to create a little bit of spacing. Up and bottom we'll do 0, but left and right we'll do 10 pixels, just to create a little bit of spacing for us. And then we'll give ourselves a padding. And this is going to be real important, and I'll show and explain why in just a second. When I reload this, we now have a different font. We have a little bit bigger text, so it's easier to read. That all is obvious. But the thing that wasn't probably as obvious was why I added the padding. And that's a real important thing, actually. And it deals with what they call the click area. And that is, do I need to click exactly on a letter, or can I click close to my link? So if you look here and you see my mouse cursor, it's still a pointer, even though I'm off of my link for a little bit. And that gives me an area where I can still be active. I can still click and go where I want to go. And that just improves my usability for my website and how easy it is for me to use. So that's something that's really important. Um, I never want to make a website that's difficult to use. I don't want to make a website that people have to work at. I want to be able to make it so where I'm close. Now, I used a little bit high end. If you look back at this text, I did a padding of 10 pixels. In reality, I'm usually picking anywhere between 3 and 7 pixels. Um, I don't have to, I kind of over exaggerated for this example, just so you can see. But in reality, I want to have that little extra space. That way, if someone who they're just moving quick, they can click on it. Maybe they have a physical or visual limitation. They can't see as well, or their hand shakes, or something like that. They get a ability to have a larger click target area that they can click on and still go to that link. I'm probably not going to do this on all my links because I don't want to make it stand out, but it is something I want to look at potentially doing. The other thing that I can do is I can create what we call states. And this is it's called a pseudo class of different attributes in CSS. But I can go in and change my selectors to put in a pseudo class and look for a state that my element is in. Let me give you a perfect example of that real quick. I'm going to nav a, and I'm going to pick hover. Hover is by far the most common of these pseudo classes. And it just says that when I have a mouse cursor over my link. So it doesn't have to be anything specific. It's just letting us know we want to do something a little bit different. And a perfect example of what I might do is I might change my color to be an orange. Now when I roll over, notice it turns orange. I now immediately know that my link is active. Okay, so I don't have to do anything. This is a immediate visual clue. Now this obviously doesn't work if the person using your website is visually impaired. Um, Now, if they're visually impaired, they have special software which is going to let them know where the links are and how to navigate them. So this isn't perfect as far as making sure everyone can use the website, but this improves my usability so I know white text versus other white text. I have seen some people say, oh, well, all links have to be blue because by default they're blue, but that doesn't always work and that doesn't make it necessarily easier to read just because it's blue. I see some people say, well, I will always have underlines for my navigation. Well, that's great, but that's not always the best option either. So we always want to look at different things as far as how will I know. Whenever I use a hover, I want to make sure it's never going to send me to a different line because then, and I've seen this happen, you like hover and then it sends you to another line because it got bigger and then, oh, you're not hovering. So it sends it back. And now it like flickers and it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I'm not going to change my font type or family. I'm not going to change my font size. I'm not going to change if it's bold or not. But I will change things like my background color, my foreground color, um, those type of things. I might change my border color or style if I have a border associated with it. Those type of things are safe to change. And notice in my text, in my code here, when I have my anchor tag, when I have my hover, I only change what I need to. Everything else stays the same. It remembers those values. So I only need to change what is being changed. And that's a real important component of that. Okay, let's go back to our text. Okay, so that's where I'm going to have those links, like in my navigation versus uh, my author versus I might have another style if I'm not inside a header for an article. If I'm just in my article itself, if I'm dealing all within a single web page or excuse me, a multi-page single website, uh, then a lot of times I'm going to use what they call relative link path. And it just says, in relation to where I currently am in my file structure, how do I access this file? So if I got to go to a parent, I'm going to use dot dot and a forward slash. If I'm going to a subfolder, then I have to specify that subfolder name. It's just kind of up to how the files are organized. Uh, your file organization and file structure, that's something we talked about way back when we talked about organizing and designing your site. So when you're coming up with a portfolio website for yourself, and you're thinking about, okay, what types of things do I need to have in my website? You might think, okay, do I want to put things in subfolders? Do I want to just have them all in my main folder? Um, if I'm dealing with a smaller website, that's usually what I want to do. In which case, I can just say, here's the file name, as it all stays relative. And that's a real common thing. If I'm going to use an absolute path, and I sometimes want to do that if I have like a really complicated website or things are going to move around, um, I can use an absolute path. An absolute path specifies, hey, I'm going to start with a slash. So I'm always going to start at a known location, and then I'm going to move through my subfolders. So um, if you have a subfolder structure, especially like your navigation links, those a lot of times will use absolute paths because I don't necessarily know where I'm coming from. So it's just something to think about if you have a more complicated website. If your website's simple and everything's in one subfolder or in one folder, relative usually works for you. Okay. We talked about the nested selectors already. Um, let's look at the external links real quick. When I go to an external link, I need to be able to. I'm going to a different website. I'm not on my website anymore. So um, forget absolute paths or relative paths. Now I'm going someplace completely different. different host, different server, and therefore I have to give the full address. Okay. Um, so this is broken out in little sections, and you can see here on the screen an example of what we're looking at. You have um, your protocol, HTTPS, Hypertext Transport Protocol, secured. Okay, starting in 2019, um, Google was highly encouraging everyone to go to that. Um, just as a little bit safety precaution because now data is encrypted. In reality, it's overkill for 90% of what goes on. If I'm reading an article on CNN, I don't care that's encrypted or not. Um, but if I am logged in and I have some uh, user information, like a username or something like that, then that gets transmitted every time I make a request. And that's why they're recommending that it be updated. Now, if I don't log into a website, I really don't care. Um, but they decide, to better safe than sorry. Let's encourage everyone to always use the secure protocol. Then I'm going to have a subdomain. Now, a lot of times the www is becoming optional, and it's the same as if you don't put it or have no subdomain. But you can, and I've actually seen websites that have one website for www, their site name, versus no www. So that does happen. Then you have your domain. Where am I going? Tusculum.edu, accesslearn.com, cnn.com, all those different types of things. Those are all different domains, and each one is set up separately and independently. I then have optional subfolders. You see on the screen, there's an example where I have the optional subfolders are being shown, and then a file. If a file is not picked, once again, it goes back to that default file that you might see. Okay, so your subdomain is optional. Your subfolders are optional, and even your linked file itself is optional. There's a way around it, but you have to have the protocol. You have to have the domain. So real important as far as that goes. That goes inside your href. Outside of that, everything about the link is the same. If you want to use that relationship attribute, the rel attribute, to specify this external, you can, but it's not required. That's optional. And that's just to really let bots know and search engines know, stuff like that. Hey, we're leaving the website, and we just want you to know about that. But it's not required by any stretch of imagination. Like I said, the only thing that's required is your protocol and your domain. Those are the only two required parts of an external link when you do your href. Now, you may need the other parts, but they're not required. All right. Um, is there any questions about creating links from either page to page, inside of your page, or externally? Um, Anything at all that I should be aware of? Let me. Oh, it did not tell me this earlier. I'm sorry. You had a question. So padding is basically help you so you don't really have to click on a tab. Exactly. You can miss. You can literally miss, if you would, your link and just be close enough. And the padding is going to help you make sure that you actually hit your target. Your margin, that's because your padding is, remember, inside your border, your content area. And so that's where your background color is going to appear. Your margin is outside that area, and that is not considered clickable area. That's like no man's land. So only your padding, but your padding does increase your click area and make it so that if they miss the actual text, they still have something to link on. So, any other questions, sir? Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I go. I see that you came in. Thank you for coming. I cannot. I can see that you're here. It just showed up. Did you just join, or was it when I was sharing that it didn't display? Which could have happened. Because when I was sharing my screen, I did not see Tyler's question from earlier. Okay. Um, so we're about done. It's almost 3 p.m. Eastern time. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm getting ready to exit out of this. If you don't have a specific question, um, and it's always a challenge when you're dealing with. I know a lot of people are dealing with different time zones and stuff right now. Um, so but what I've done is I've recorded this, so I'm going to uh, download this file and I will post it to YouTube, and there will be a link on the Moodle page. So if you need to go back and reference this, you have that as an opportunity for you and everyone else. Um, we originally had scheduled a quiz, I think it was going to be this week, um, and I'm pushing that back to next week just as an FYI. Because I know a lot of people have been traveling this week as they've been headed back to town because of changes um, with either quarantine or potential quarantines, and with potential travel restrictions, and want to get back home while they still could. I had a friend of mine who went to Europe a couple weeks ago, and she made literally, she said, the last plane back from Europe. Um, and she had to take like 4 planes to get back into the states, and now she's under uh, like a 15 to 30 day quarantine. Um, so I know a lot of stuff is going on, so I'm postponing the quiz at least to Friday, just to give everyone a chance to get back in time and get settled and review information and stuff. I'm going to be posting this online, um, as well as future ones. Once again, just to make sure that everyone has a chance to have access to the information and they can move forward. All the links are available on um, Moodle as well for the last week of classes as well as this week. So you have that, and we'll just do the best we can moving forward.